Thank you everybody for joining this session. It's the last session of the day, and so I'm hoping that we can all use this as an opportunity to talk about, of course, collaborative and generative reflection as a safeguarding practice, but also to reflect back on things that have really stood out over the last 2 days from the various sessions that we've been in. To move something forward after this. So to use this not only as a learning opportunity, but also an opportunity to inspire some action from all of us working together on this important work across the province. Um, so collaborative reflection is a strategy that can be used to generate new ideas and understandings of and opportunities for inclusion. It's also a safeguarding strategy in many ways that we'll talk about over the session. These might include bringing people together to understand inclusive post-secondary education as a part of a greater social movement of lifelong inclusion, removing barriers to inclusion, and safeguarding inclusive practices. It can also help us raise consciousness in moments where we're making compromises to inclusion, and inspire collective action to make good things happen for students. So in the session, we'll describe reflective practice and how it's a key strategy in inclusive post-secondary education initiatives. We'll have a few facilitators from across BC share some examples of collaborative reflection that have led to safeguarding an inclusive practice or generating a new inclusive experience at their campus. And we'll wrap up the session by working together to generate some ideas of how to bring others into reflection with the intention of building relationships that can safeguard inclusion in our own individual contexts. So often when we think about reflective practice, the first thing we think of is an individual practice in which we intentionally and critically consider a past experience in order to understand and learn from it. In inclusive post-secondary education, we focus a lot of attention on practicing reflection as a collaborative process where multiple people come together to develop a stronger understanding of the values of inclusive post-secondary education, and together generate ideas and collective commitment to see those ideas become reality. These can include ideas on how to respond to a challenge, how to move something forward for a student, how to increase student access to a particular opportunity, how to overcome an administrative barrier, all kinds of different things and different roles. So this doesn't mean that inclusion facilitators and other initiative staff are not reflecting individually or in groups amongst themselves. That's essential too. The reality, though, is that we know we don't do this work alone. Instructors that include students in their classes, administrators who find ways to overcome systems barriers, student life organizers who make space for students in leadership roles, families who have high expectations of a good life for their family member, and all of the other allies we engage in this work with. These are the people who make inclusive post-secondary education possible. So there's a lot of vulnerability when facilitators or inclusive post-secondary education organizations are perceived as the bringers of inclusion to campus. Bringing people into generative reflection helps everyone understand not only what inclusive post-secondary education is and the values that drive it, but also that everyone has a role and can take action, whether that is including a student in a classroom, building awareness on campus, or working together to safeguard against larger risks or vulnerabilities to inclusion. As mentioned yesterday and today by Charmaine, reflecting with others who can act as critical friends is a way to safeguard against vulnerabilities like values erosion and programmatic thinking that can happen unconsciously within initiatives and help us maintain high expectations of our own support for students on campus and their individual experiences.
Reflective practice is a commitment of inclusive post-secondary education because it is one of the most powerful tools that we have for moving inclusion forward on campus and in the broader community. I also resonated with Charmaine's session, and especially when she shared the importance of turning the mirror inwards and reflecting on ways that maybe bias, devaluation might be coming to the forefront of practices, and the importance of reflecting on the use of language as well. Practicing reflection is a way to hold ourselves accountable in supporting an authentic student experience that aligns with the values of inclusive post-secondary education. And when reflecting, we might ask questions like, what would this type of experience look like for any other student? Or am I compromising or drifting away from that authentic student experience? Or who can I invite in to help? And through relationship building and having reflective conversations with others, we can develop allies who can take action that will benefit the lifelong inclusion of students. Bruce shared yesterday that families are the leaders of sustaining inclusion over someone's lifetime. So it's critical that we seek input from families and reflect together. When facilitators do this consistently and over time with thoughtful curiosity, that's how we can build trust so that the best experiences happen for students during and after post-secondary. Facilitators will network with others outside of a student's family, people who are maybe already allies, curious people who could be potential allies, and people who might not connect to the work that we're doing. By having reflective conversations with community members, it can sometimes be really surprising who turns out to be a strong ally. So don't count anyone out, but pay attention to questions, comments, their body language, and responsiveness of others when talking about the facilitation of natural supports necessary for authentic inclusion to happen. The role of the facilitator is to be a strong voice for inclusion and to show that inclusion is for everyone. Every student, regardless of their disability, and everyone connected to the student has the capacity to contribute to an inclusive community and experience. Reflective practice is built over time. It takes many conversations, it takes intentionality. It is the practice of working with others to build their confidence and capabilities in fostering belonging. Um, there is no like one size fits all way of facilitating inclusion, and we will often have to try different approaches and adjust over time. The collaborative conversations that we have with allies and potential allies helps to develop the skills of others in co-creating inclusive communities. So an example of this would be a facilitator meets with an instructor prior to the start of term to request the inclusion of a student in their class. And in this conversation, let's say the facilitator would probably share values of inclusive post-secondary education, maybe explain how this student's going to be a full participant in the course and complete coursework in a way that's going to showcase their learning in the best way possible, and maybe even give examples of what that's going to look like. That the aim is for the facilitator and the instructor to work together to support the students' meaningful educational experiences and their belonging in the course, and discuss the respective roles and responsibilities of the facilitator, the instructor, and the student. So the student's role would be to learn and engage in the class content. The instructor's role would be to have high expectations of the student's learning and engagement in their class. And the facilitator's role is to support this to happen amongst the student, the instructor, and their classmates. The facilitator would take the opportunity to share information about how the student engages in their classes and maybe even also how they engage with others. So let's say the student will often raise their hand in class and ask questions or share comments that maybe don't relate to the class content. So a reflective conversation would look like a facilitator might ask the instructor, how does this like come up in like maybe some of your previous experiences? How do you handle this with other students? The instructor might share that they really try to listen to the comment, maybe ask them clarifying questions and find a way to connect it, or ask the student to themselves elaborate and draw a connection between their comment and the subject matter. The facilitator might suggest that the instructor take that approach with the student's comments that they might share in class. The facilitator and the instructor might also reflect on perhaps the student raising their hand and sharing comments might be their way of connecting with the instructor. So it could also be their way of maybe being an active participant in their class. The facilitator might ask the instructor, for keen students who want more time to connect with you, what would they do? And the instructor might share that they hold office hours weekly and welcome all students to visit them in their office hours. And that could be a time where it's more open discussion and students can sort of, talk about whatever they want and might go down on different tangents and like the rabbit hole of a discussion. And that's kind of fun. The facilitator might encourage the student to take the instructor's offer to visit in office hours and maybe encourage the instructor to take that time with the student to like maybe together work on some like questions that they could ask that would be related to the topic of next week's discussion. So these kinds of conversations with community can take some practice. It's helpful to ask questions like, what would this look like for any other student? Or how does this typically work? And brainstorm a plan based off of that approach. There is a quote from Inclusion Alberta that says, reflective practice helps us move from reaction to the curiosity and compassion and courage necessary in the search for a better way. When we engage in reflective practice with others to safeguard inclusion, it builds the capacity of the community to foster belonging. If the facilitator was not present one day or the initiative was no longer on a campus, there would be campus community members who have experiences, knowledge, and capabilities to facilitate inclusion. Engaging in reflective practice is a tool that we can use to build the movement of inclusion. Let's look at the next slide. Thanks. Okay, so earlier I shared that reflective practice is a powerful tool for advancing inclusion. I also consider story sharing to be a powerful tool for fostering our curiosity and compassion and inspiration to see what's possible. So I will now like to invite a few of the people on our panel to share some stories of reflective practice. So first, we are going to hear from Ezra. Ezra is a community organizer with Steps Forward, and they would like to share a story from when they were a facilitator at Capilano University. Hi, Ezra.
Hello. Like Emily said, I used to be a facilitator at CapU before fully moving into my role as community organizer. And I wanted to share a story about a reflective conversation that I had with an instructor on my last week on campus that turned into a pool of generating ideas to safeguard inclusion in her classroom. So I was supporting a student in this classroom. She's an ECE student who has taken a lot of classes on theory in childcare, Reggio Emilia, Montessori, what's better, what are the best practices, a lot of reading and writing, which the student does do these things. But I would say that she shared with me that they're not the best ways that she's able to share her understanding of course material. So when I came to talk to the instructor about how she saw the student participating in the exam, what kind of modifications she could suggest based on what her plans for the exam would be. She talked about a typical um, question and answer, short answer, multiple choice. Um, and then she said, what do you think the best way for me to present the exam could be? Or how could the student benefit from a modified exam? And I suggested that from what I know of the student, she, like I said, prefers to show her understanding of course material by doing things that she knows how to do. The student has worked with children for a long time in preschools and daycares, and she knows how to change a diaper. She knows how to feed a baby. She knows how to properly hold babies so they're safe. I don't know these things, but she absolutely does. And the instructor recognized that the formats that she'd been teaching the student, and she'd been teaching her for a few years, the student had taken several classes with her, we're not giving the student an opportunity to like really have a win in her classroom and demonstrate to her fellow students that she knew what was going on and she was successful in her field. Um, so the instructor suggested a practical exam where every student would demonstrate their understanding of how to feed a baby, how to hold a baby, and how to change a diaper. And we came up with an idea of how this could work in an exam format with a grading rubric that the student could participate in. Um, and I think that was all based on a conversation where the instructor gained an understanding of that often exams give students an opportunity to win and show their understanding and excellence in the class, and that the student deserved an opportunity to do that too in the best way that she knew how to participate. So I was really grateful to have that conversation, and I left my role as a facilitator knowing that the student would have a really amazing time participating in that exam. And probably more fun than writing and reading and answering questions on paper.
Totally. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
I would actually like to share the next story. It's one about developing a relationship with the UVic co-op department and how we worked together with the director of undergraduate records to create access to the co-op program for students studying exercise science and physical health education at the University of Victoria. So, cooperative education or co-op lets students try out different career options and gain paid work experience in their field of interest while studying at university. So, students alternate between taking classes and paid work terms. And this is like a really popular thing to do at UVic. 56% of UVic students will do a co-op work term. So it all started with a student's interest in co-op. He was in his second year of university and started to hear about the co-op program from classmates and teachers. He also shared that his dad, when he was a student at UVic, did a co-op. So the student and I talked to his EFE professor about student experiences and professional development opportunities that would be typical of someone studying EFE. His professor mentioned that EFE co-op work experience program might be something of interest and suggested that he get in touch with a co-op coordinator. So the next step was for us to make the connection with the co-op department. I had a meeting with the co-op coordinator for exercise science and physical health education. I shared information about UVic's partnership with the Initiative for Inclusive Post-Secondary Education, a little bit about my role as the facilitator in supporting students in authentic university experiences. And the EFE students hopes to participate in the full experience of the co-op program. She was really supportive of the idea of creating access or at least mirroring the experience and offered to take what she learned from our conversation and discuss the opportunity with her director. Later that summer, I heard back from the coordinator stating that the director had some concerns around the student designation being an auditor as a barrier to accessing the co-op program, sort of saying that she had done some research in the academic calendar and didn't really understand how an auditing student could participate because typically an auditor wouldn't. So the coordinator was circling back to have a second conversation with me, wanting to clarify that the students accessing their studies through the audit designation with support from Inclusive Post-Secondary are participatory auditors, that they are full participants in like everything that they're doing in classes. So like tests, assignments, group work, labs or practicum classes. And that, you know, if he were to do a co-op, that it would be like all of the things that are part of that experience. I shared that that's correct, and I continue to share that the audit status is what allows entry into university for students who might not meet the academic requirements for crediting. But the audit status is perhaps not the best indicator of students' experiences once at university because they are participating fully in their classes and in campus life. I shared that the audit status has come up in the past as a barrier to accessing like really typical experiences at UVic, like counseling services or on-campus housing. And that what I'm looking for is for people to work with me to see past the auditing status of students, to find a way forward and to advocate for inclusion. The coordinator and I discussed what that could look like and how creating access to the co-op program for the student would be a really good example of UVic's equity goals in action, and in particular, their stated commitment of upholding the values of equity, diversity, and inclusion in our living, learning, and work environments, and to value the contribution that each person brings and are committed to ensuring full and equal participation that all in our community. We also discussed how the University of Victoria received a mandate letter from the Minister of Advanced Education, Skills and Training outlining expectations for the university to contribute to an accessible and relevant post-secondary system by implementing initiatives to increase participation and success for students, including vulnerable and underrepresented groups, as well as develop and recognize flexible learning pathways for students to access post-secondary education and skills training. The coordinator then shared the clarification of the audit status and the advocacy pieces of the university's equity goals and letter of from the Minister of Advanced Education that we picked out together with her director. And we finally heard back that the student would be able to participate in the co-op program. Once it was time to register, there was a second hurdle. So We heard that there was no way for the student to be enrolled as an auditor in the work term in the UVic registration system. However, the acting director of the UVic undergraduate records of the time suggested a method of enrolling in EFI 494, which is a self-directed studies course, with the full intention of participating in his co-op work terms. So between the student, the co-op coordinator, the co-op director, the acting director of UVic undergraduate records, and the employers where the student did his 3 work terms, all work together to collaborate and find really creative ways of moving forward, regardless of hurdles that came up along the way, to create an inclusive and authentic and valuable work experience for the student. He graduated with his certificate of completion in exercise science and physical health education. And on his parchment, it had the co-op student designation, showing he had completed in the full co-op program. And he was also offered a permanent position at the workplace where he did his last co-op work term. So the inclusion facilitators at UVic made an inclusive co-op roadmap document and do plan to formalize this process with UVic's co-op department so that future students can participate in co-op programs as well. So thanks for letting me share my story. I'd now like to turn it over to Renine to share a story from Simon Fraser University.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. Yeah, so today I'll be sharing a story that happened earlier this semester at SFU, where an entire community was invited and kind of brought into a challenging situation that required critical reflection to safeguard inclusive practices. So throughout the semester, we supported an SFU kinesiology student who was volunteering at the fitness center. And so when the student was new to the role, my responsibility was, or I guess my role was to float around near the fitness center to provide support to either the student or to the other staff members. However, a few weeks into the semester, as the student eventually got more comfortable and felt he found a supportive community that enhanced his sense of belonging, we agreed that I would phase out from being a floater to just maintaining regular communication with the fitness center staff. And so eventually, in checking in with the staff members about halfway throughout the term, some of the students' colleagues had brought up some concerns about the workplace inappropriate topics that the student was bringing up during his shifts. And so as they were unsure about how to proceed, not only did they connect with me, but they had also brought the fitness center coordinator into the loop, who then also reached out for advice on how to approach the situation thoughtfully. And I think what we all appreciated as a team at SFU was the fitness center coordinator recognizing that it was evident the student had found a supportive community where he felt comfortable sharing these topics, but she also shared the importance of maintaining a safe and respectful space for all. So what this eventually led to were several follow-up conversations with the fitness center staff and the coordinator, where in one of these conversations, one senior team leader offered to have a private supportive conversation with the student to go over the communication expectations of the fitness center. She was able to chat with the student, and together in collaboration with the student, they created a do's and don'ts list, not only just for that student, but for the entire fitness center staff that any staff or volunteer member could refer to over, I guess, while they're working there. Through this process, both the student and the fitness center staff were invited into a moment of reflection. The staff were able to consider how to support the students' learning while upholding their own values of professionalism and inclusivity. And so they were really looking to balance safeguarding the students' supportive network with, the center's sense of belonging. And at the same time, the entire staff was also encouraged to reflect on how they typically navigate boundary setting and how they model respectful and inclusive behaviors in their roles on a daily basis. This reflective approach was able to create a valuable learning moment for everybody involved. So not only did the student gain greater awareness of the workplace communication norms and also how to recognize and respect social cues in a professional setting, but the staff also strengthened their shared understanding of how to respond to situations in ways that are clear, respectful, and aligned with their commitment to inclusion. think what was important for us all to reflect on was, had this opportunity for reflection been missed, the students might not have actually received the feedback and the guidance needed to grow from the experience. And the discomfort felt by staff could have gone unaddressed, potentially impacting the sense of safety and belonging for others. And so through this entire community coming together, this moment safeguarded the practice of maintaining respectful communication in shared spaces and reinforced the idea that we kind of, I think, all are working towards, the notion that everyone has a role to play in nurturing an environment where all feel welcome. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Renine. Okay. Next up, we have Eric, who's going to share a reflective story of an Emily Carr experience.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Yeah, so over the last few years, the facilitator at Emily Carr um, identified that even though Emily Carr is an art and design university, we actually haven't, in recent memory at least, if ever, supported a student within the Department of Design. So just to clarify, students have taken visual arts classes, fine arts, animation, illustration, and a number of other programs in the arts side of Emily Carr, but not the communication, interaction, or design pathways. So identifying this, I pitched to the Dean of Design and Dynamic Media that it would be a great opportunity to kind of build this collaboration. Um, and this came through a process of reflection with our key contacts and myself and my director, Lauren. And we identified that this would be something worth investing time in. And even though there was reception on the part of the university, we didn't receive many applicants that year, if any, interested in design. And so we didn't end up supporting a student that year. But through reflection, it seemed to me that this was more likely due to applicants not being aware that design was an option for them. But it also seemed like an important opportunity not to miss this potential collaboration with the Faculty of Design. So we another kind of moment of reflection was recognizing that because the university, half of the university is design, it would be a valuable way of increasing awareness and buy-in from the university for the inclusive post-secondary initiative. In other words, if only half of the university is actively partnered with us or involved, that could limit further investment in kind of leadership meetings or administrative decision making. So this year, instead of having a broad open application process for Emily Carr, we specifically sought out applicants interested in design. And with this approach, the Faculty of Design was even more invested since they were able to kind of anticipate this spot and plan ahead and problem solve together. Um, and a student who had multiple interests did in fact apply, and we are now offering that student the spot to start in industrial design next fall, and that'll be the first ever student to study industrial design. Um, the associate deans of design had already mapped out or have already mapped out some of the recommended courses. We've worked together on that and reflected on some of the potential barriers and challenges, and they've been really keen collaborators. And just to identify the risk of not reflecting in this way would have been to continue with the status quo, which was working, but was potentially missing the opportunity to collaborate for design. And the perception of design maybe being seen as too competitive or dangerous, using heavy machinery, or too ambitious for students. There's a moment to kind of confront that and maybe change those expectations. And I think the benefits are multiple. The student will have the chance to study something they're passionate about, and it could hopefully open doors for other students in the future who who are interested in design. And it will hopefully expand the number of allies and collaborators so that more of the leadership team at the university is aware of our partnership and the initiative can be further embedded and safeguarded at the highest level of the university. Yeah, so that's my story.
Thank you, Eric, Reneen, and Ezra for sharing your stories with us. Let's take a look at the next slide. I think a common thread that's running through each of your stories is that there was both individual reflection and a consideration of who to bring in to collaborate with. And in collaborative reflection with others, the facilitator role would be to keep the vision of full inclusion in the focus, but also welcome in and expect others to contribute to how to make it possible in a specific context, whether that's, a classroom or a final exam or a program of study or a fitness center or a workplace or work term, social event, friend group, whatever. The collaborative reflection, brainstorming, and planning is one aspect of the practice. The other would be the collaborative action from others that was generated from the ideas of all those included in the reflection. Okay, next slide.
Sorry, I'm just getting the breakout room kind of organized here. One sec.
So we are going to go into a fun breakout room where we're asking people to share a story of bringing others into reflection that generated a new understanding or an idea. So I think we'll have about 5 minutes to discuss in small groups of 2 or 3, and then we'll rejoin the group, and a few people will be able to share with everyone. So maybe also identify that person who would want to share.
All right, I will open the groups. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope that presented an opportunity for everybody to share some really positive stories of why reflective practice is such an important strategy. I was hoping to have a little bit of time to share, but we're running tight on time, and I want to make sure we have time for the last breakout group activity, which is going to be where we generate some ideas to move forward after the. So I'll move on right away to the next slide. As has been mentioned throughout the session, part of safeguarding is to talk about risks and vulnerabilities to inclusive post-secondary education initiatives. So these are not necessarily all-encompassing. We know that there are other kinds of vulnerabilities and risks, but what we're noticing in BC as sort of these larger scale kind of risks out on the periphery are things like the wide-scale budget cuts and budget deficits that are experienced by many post-secondary institutions. So impacts to initiatives and students that we have seen come from this can be loss of supportive instructors, key allies, and campus contacts who held history and knowledge of important processes tied to inclusive post-secondary partnerships due to campus staff restructuring or layoffs. In addition, departments and programs tighten. Student opportunities can become competitive and more exclusive due to scarcity. This can impact students, particularly when people don't have a good understanding of inclusive post-secondary education as an equitable and fulsome undergraduate studies pathway, and instead interpret the audit status in ways that limit student access. It can also impact students when the certificate of completion is perceived as a different type of category than undergraduate student. In the media and various public narratives, there's increased discussion and some harmful misunderstandings about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and increased conversation and perception of the value of meritocracy in post-secondary and employment settings. Potential impacts of this can vary. In some cases, we've seen it actually result in an increased support and action from our post-secondary partners who are confidently committed to their values of inclusion and diversity. At others, however, we're noticing hesitance to move inclusive practices forward on campus, with some of our post-secondary partners preferring to keep the status quo rather than commit to progress. As mentioned in previous sessions, the prevalence of and sort of social support for segregated groups and artificial friend groups on campus pose serious risks to student identity and really the very definition of what it means to be inclusive. So we know that mitigating and preventing the negative impacts of these risks requires developing alliances with others who support the full inclusion of students and take action to support that inclusion in their own contexts, communities, and circles of influence. So as you think about who these people are for you in the context in which you come to this work from, I'd like you to all start brainstorming into the chat, but don't hit send yet. So it'll take about a minute for everybody to jot down who are the people in your circle you could invite into reflective conversation about these risks or others that come to mind for you in your context.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah.
And I know I've mentioned this to you, Lauren, but because like I live in such a small town, does anybody else find that the current political climate in the States has kind of given people a different idea or opinion of what DEI is and the importance of it?
Yeah, I think that's what I was kind of getting at with that risk.
Yeah, because I know people here are all about it.
Yeah. Awesome. So now if everyone can hit send or the post or whatever the button says. Awesome. Great. I'll just sort of read some as they're coming in. So we've got other teachers, those interested in inclusion, but also those interested in diversity. Got some lovely names reflecting with the communities of practice, faculty, student services staff, friends, colleagues, department heads, EDI committees, professors, deans, MLAs, faculty, administrators, parents, student peers, inviting friends who work in the disability service field who might not have considered unconscious bias. Very good. Awesome. So there's lots. I won't read all of them, but it's exciting. And I hope that what everybody gets out of this is that we've got people. We can bring them in to conversations because, yeah, we know we can't do this work alone. All right. So before about jumping into the next breakout group, there's one person who will have a job. So I'm hoping each group can identify one person who will act as a note taker. The note taker will take notes of the conversation, also collect the email addresses of your group members. So you may even open up a blank email and take notes in an email format. That could be fine. And then at the end of your conversation or at the end of the day today, you'll email, that note taker will email the group the notes after the session. And the hope with this is that this not only preserves the conversation that was had, but creates a new little community from the symposium that you can continue to connect with over the year for critical friends, for reflecting, to work through challenges. I think what we get, part of what we get through the symposium is really an experience of how valuable it is when we all come together from our different contexts and our different provinces and our different communities to talk about this work. So hopefully this can be a way to keep that going throughout the next year into the next symposium. So in your breakout group, and we won't be able to do 20 minutes, I'll have to cut it a little bit short. I think we'll maybe do 10. But in your breakout group, as a group, we want to try to identify 3 values that you collectively agree are really important to understand about inclusive post-secondary education before inviting someone in to generate ideas or act. So we know from the keynote with Bruce that having that values piece is at the very forefront of every conversation we're having is really, really essential to safeguarding. So we want to identify what that could look like first. And then together generate a commitment that includes a tangible action that you'll take to engage in a generative, reflective conversation. That could be related to things you heard in this session, but I also want you to think about previous sessions if there's something that stood out to you or something that kind of really inspired you to say, I want to do that in my community or I want to do that on my campus. Think of that. That's totally great. So let me just get the breakout rooms going again here.
Will you put the instructions in the chat box as well?
Absolutely. Yes.
Are they already there?
They are not. Actually, Emily, would you mind typing that out into the chat?
Or I can take a picture.
All right. 3 values and a commitment. Okay, I will open all rooms. Awesome. Welcome back, everybody. I know it feels like never enough time. We're already 5 minutes to the end, but I wanted to provide an opportunity for anyone who wants to share their ideas from the breakout group with the larger group.
Could maybe pop in really quickly with a few of the things that we mentioned in my group. So one of the first values that we discussed was equity, the idea that everyone who wants to learn should be given the opportunity to. I think one of the other things that we touched on was the idea that accessibility also includes inclusion, that inclusion is not extra work, and that it's the idea that we need to almost be more proactive and lower barriers before they actually become barriers. And then I think last but not least, the idea that the policies that these institutions all enforce should actually reflect the values and the visions of the institution. This idea that we should practice what we preach. So I think those are 3 great values we discussed.
Some of the values that we discussed, that inclusion isn't charity, so including someone, letting them come into the room it's not being nice, it's what the morally acceptable behavior. That the expectation that inclusion is reciprocal, so inclusion isn't just letting someone in the room, but expecting that you'll form a reciprocal community bond with them, that they have things to contribute just as everyone else does. And that inclusion isn't merit-based, so people don't deserve inclusion just because they're likable or nice, but even people you disagree with, even people you don't like, deserve to be included in the community.
Those are great. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. So hopefully note takers, you've got everyone's email and you can send your notes out. And again, I hope that this is now an invitation to reconnect with your group. If you're looking to chat something through with somebody that's, in a totally different place or in a totally different context, or doing the same work in a different campus or in a different place, that we've broadened some of our inclusive post-secondary education circles through this session. And if you'd like to join or to ask Emily or I to join any of your follow-up group reflections, we are very happy to join. We would love to hear more of what you guys are working on and reflecting on. So please feel free to CC us or invite us to an upcoming reflection if you choose to do that with your groups.